Hello there. I'm David Madwin. I'm the managing director of Sherwood Players, and occasionally I come in to do interviews for the Sherwood Shakeup. We have a really special guest today, Caren Ann Appel, and our very own Steve Brock, who helps us with so many things from our tech and our website and our classes and our Spiff Film Festival. So it's so lovely to have him on. And today the discussion is going to be focused on mental health and how that affects people in general and artists and art, and how so much of what we do is affected by our mental health. And so many people have questions about how their mental health affects their art and their ability to make art and their ability to do the business so they can make art. So today we have a very special guest, Caren Ann Appel. She's a psychotherapist. She has an MSW, which I just learned is a master's in social work. She has an MA in gender studies and history. And she is just an all-around amazing person. She works with LGBTQ youth. She works with artists. We're going to learn, is an artist herself, a little behind the scenes, peeking behind the curtain. And I'm just so excited to talk with her. But first, just so you know a little bit about me, you're never going to hear me do that, because the only time I do is when I think about the fact that I have Tourette's syndrome, which I don't generally do when making art. But I have Tourette's, and I have ADD, and I have ADHD. And it's something I've dealt with my entire life and has gotten better, but it has definitely affected my art, and my art has affected it. I've never once had a Tourette's on stage. Why? I'm not exactly sure. But there are a lot of people with different pathways in their brain who come to arts. That's just sort of a place where we collect. And a good friend of mine, and obviously a huge part of the Sherwood Players, Steve Brock, is also here to talk about his own experiences. Hey, Steve, great to see you.
Great to see you. I'm really excited about this thing that's been a passion of mine for quite a while.
Awesome. I'm so glad. So I'm gonna bring you back in at the end part of the interview to talk more about some things that Caren and I bring up and your own opinions on them and your experiences. But can you just give me a little bit of a background on you and your neurodivergence?
Sure. When I was a kid, I had a lot of trouble with focus, and I would always, at the end of a day from school, just retreat to my bedroom for the rest of the day until dinner was showing up. Now, they took me to see a psychiatrist, and I went under a EKG, and they came to the conclusion that I was hyperactive. And at the time, they didn't call it ADHD, they called it hyperactivity. And I went on medication, and it helped some. It also was early days when it came to medication. So
let's do some med swaps. What meds were you on?
I was in Dexedrine.
Ooh, Dexedrine. Oh, gee. Okay. I was on clonidine and Zoloft. Woo!
Yeah.
That'll fuck you up a little bit.
Yeah, back then, because they were giving that medication. I mean, Dexedrine kind of should sound familiar, because Dexatrim was supposedly the over-the-counter version of it until it was learned that it was causing really big problems. So Dexatrim went to caffeine, and Dexedrine went off the market. But they were giving it to adults for diet pills, and they were giving it to kids to control hyperactivity. But I was also an undiagnosed bipolar, OCD, etc. And so my parents didn't know what to do with me as a kid, because they saw that I just didn't want to be with people. That's all they thought. And they didn't stop to think that I might have depression or be bipolar or have any other issues besides hyperactivity, which is so generic that it's never used again.
Basically a laughable catch-all term. It's not much of a step up from the 1920s when you had, the lunacy, literally the mooner controlling women. That's why they're crazy.
One of my favorite ones I brought up last night with a conversation is the hysteria. Is an old term that was applied to women who the doctors thought were crazy, and that hysteria is a Latin hyster. That's it definitely applied to women, which is, I mean, I'm sure Caren might bring that up at some point. It's really great.
So a hysterectomy, when you remove your uterus, literally means removing your insanity.
Well,
That's not sexist at all. No.
no, it's removing your womanhood. So that's that. The hister part is the woman part.
Ah, okay. I feel like we are very male for this conversation.
Yeah.
And we've
Well,
got a wonderful, talented, incredibly learned woman lady. I believe that's the proper term now. Yes, woman lady. Yeah, she's laughing. But she's not amused.
growing up, I did musicals in high school, and I found my people in a lot of ways. People that I were doing choir and musicals with, all in general had some degree of neurodiversity. I mean, I went to a pretty unusual high school.
Where did you go to high school?
Saratoga High School up.
Yeah, I went to Homestead High School. I knew
Yeah.
people from Saratoga. Sometimes I forget when I'm interviewing people, like, oh right, I know this person. I also found my crowd early. I always said I wanted to be an actor, so my stepdad was like, let's put him in acting camp. And summer camp was like, oh, people who don't constantly pick on me and make me feel terrible. Yay, theater people.
They say the family that you choose is stronger than the family you're born with.
Although the family that I'm born with would cut me if I said differently. But yeah, that can be sometimes be true. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to bring you off and bring you back on later in the show. See you soon.
See you soon.
All right, now for our guest of honor, Caren Ann Appel. Hey there, Caren. How you doing?
Hey, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. So you're an interesting person.
As Claude Van Bulow would say, you have no idea. But no, I'm just kidding. As are you, and as is your guest. So I feel like I'm in stellar company.
So can you tell me why you wanted to become a psychotherapist, or if that was even a term that you knew when you were first interested?
Yeah, it's funny because if you were to look in my 6th grade yearbook, where I went to a really small, very small Hebrew day school, which is, Jewish version for like parochial school. Since you have such a small class, you can write a whole thing about yourself. And I had said, when I grow up, I want to be a clinical psychologist and an author and live in California by the beach. And so I did live in California. I did live by the beach. Most of those things happened, but not quite in the way I thought it would, which is exactly, man plans and God laughs, as they say.
Isn't that wild how all of our plans we have, they all come to fruition in some way or another, but the ways that they don't are generally the best things. The best things are the things that sideswipe us when we realize, oh, I would have never thought to want that, but here we are.
It's absolutely true. And so, that's what I want to do. And then I spent probably another 20 to 25 years running away from that. I think, to be perfectly blunt, I had to survive some of my childhood and teen years. There was a lot of primary, secondary trauma. I think it's really important that if you're going to get into this profession, you got to do your work. It's both a blessing and a burden, because on one hand, you can understand things that your clients go through, but you want to make sure that you're really seeing it through their lens. You'd want to make sure that your lens is not getting in the way. And also, I was a very neurodivergent kid. And I was lucky to be diagnosed with auditory processing disorder very young. But back then they were like, oh, okay, we'll just make it visual for her. And that was the end of the accommodation. And I had undiagnosed actually the term that they use now, it's all called ADHD with all these different subparts. I had definitely one of the ADHD inattentive types, but it was undiagnosed. I didn't get diagnosed with that till I was in my 40s when my younger child got diagnosed. My journey with it was, frankly, going to a lot of therapy myself. Learning how my brain worked was probably the hardest and the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And I didn't do any of my real creative. I never followed through with any of my creative stuff until my 40s, mostly because I had to learn, how to follow through. I had to learn how my brain worked. I had to learn what was truly an interest versus what was sort of the flash, and it's a very deep dive that we do with it, just like you have, and just like Steve has done.
So just for, people who aren't like us, crazies, what is primary versus secondary trauma?
I'm definitely going to get into that. But before that, I'm going to tell you something, how you said with the crazies. And I said, you did it in air quotes, which I appreciate. Dave Chappelle, who I know is very controversial these days, but I will always be grateful for something that he said was, when we call people crazy, including ourselves, it automatically dismisses us. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a lot of our own internalized crap from that, and listen, we can joke around all we want because we've been through it and we've earned it, for sure. But I also want to like let people out there know that having an atypical brain does not make you crazy,
Yeah.
and even the crazy is not really that crazy.
And just because you've done a crazy thing doesn't mean you're a crazy person.
That's beautiful.
Right.
Mwah.
We are,
Just beautiful.
I forget who said this quote, but we shouldn't judge people based on the worst day of their life.
That's
You
exactly
know,
right.
everyone should be held accountable for what they do, but it doesn't mean that the one thing we've done is the way
Or
we should be
2
held.
or 5 or years of it.
Or it
Exactly.
doesn't. Yeah. And
That
also
doesn't mean,
learning that everyone is going through things. Everyone you want to hate should really probably be pitied, with a couple of exceptions.
right.
You know what? I'm willing to say this. I'm also a member of the tribe.
Yes.
Originally, Madwin, until some racist people at Ellis Island were like, "Nope, Madwin, American words."
Yep.
A bunch of Nazi. I don't care. Whatever. No empathy.
Fair enough.
Everyone else, you give them a second chance.
Well, you know what? I think that it's this, and I will get into primary and secondary trauma. That actually ties into what we're talking about, because most people, hurt people. And so primary trauma is, frankly, when, let's say, it's something that's happening directly to you. It does not have to be physical or sexual. It can also be emotional. And that is something in psychological. There's a lot of people out there who never put a hand on their kid, but, did other sorts of things in terms of sort of almost a mind game. And that is trauma. Secondary trauma, and these are very, wide sweeping, broad strokes. Secondary trauma can be from witnessing something that did not necessarily happen to you, but a secondary trauma, for example, I have never been, God bless, that I've never been in a concentration camp, or I've never been in any of the things that my ancestors have. But I went to a school that, my goodness, they let us know, and they would have, like, for Holocaust Remembrance Day, they would have the really graphic pictures out saying, this is what happens when you let them in,
Yeah.
and
I have some very strong feelings on that. Knowing our history is super important, and not whitewashing it. We can't say that slaves were indentured servants.
No.
We can't say that the Holocaust was just a war. And you have to look at the entire history and geography of what happens. People oftentimes talk about the Holocaust as if it only happened to Jews, and it didn't happen in Cambodia, and it didn't happen in Russia, and it didn't happen in swaths of East Africa and a ton of other places, and all over the world.
Absolutely.
But I have to say, there are some people who I feel like use it as, and I use this term as respectfully as I can with what it is, but like gore porn, where people will describe the Holocaust and use
trauma porn. Yeah.
Trauma porn. And they'll use really graphic videos and pictures that they don't warn people about. And
Exactly.
And
you hit the nail on the head right there. It's whether you're going to give a trigger warning if they're older, so that they can make the informed choice. And when they're younger, absolutely, you can still give that same information, but it's got to be age appropriate. That's a secondary trauma. To take something outside of my personal context, I would say the same thing is true for other racial ethnic groups, whether they're dealing with that. Sometimes it's something more personal, where you are constantly hearing your parents yelling and screaming and throwing things, and they don't do it in front of you, but you're still hearing it. So that's the secondary trauma. Yeah. So when you're the neurodivergent kid, whether you have Tourette's, whether you have auditory processing, whether you have ADHD, diagnosed or undiagnosed, and back where, and I mean, what Steve was saying, and I'm a Steve fan. So,
hey.
Yeah, exactly. And now a David fan. But I will say this, that when I hear of the drugs that you were on, it's horrifying. But, that is, what they did. It is still, I believe in psychiatry. I do believe in psychopharmaceuticals to a point. I will say that for my own journey, I grew up sort of in a Valley of the Dolls sort of family, where everyone was sort of popping a pill for something, usually to deal with their really, erratic husbands. So I was very anti-medication for a very long time, even when I had gotten diagnosed. I also have anxiety. I've had depression. We've all like, let's just go on the ride,
Hey, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
or
leave.
morbidity. They all like to ride together. Exactly.
So I think it's so interesting that like we have these terms and we act like it's a specific diagnosis, but like Tourette's is linked to OCD as well. Or
So
like you think ADD is different. That's where you can't focus on anything. You can't also have OCD. It's like, no, I will sit down and I will spend 20 hours playing a video game or working on a project or writing.
Exactly. You're just hitting all the nails on the head. And because a lot of people in the mental health community really feel like the ADHD label, ADD label is actually a mislabel, because it's not that we can't focus, it's that it's a selective focus. And it's not that we can't actually, we're of course, we're all in the arts. We're freaking incredibly creative thinkers. People who have, and I'm just going to speak from ones I know a little bit more of, but for example, our ADHDers are people with any sort of different, sometimes language processing issues or auditory processing issues, tend to think more in a 3D way versus in a more verbal, sort of two-dimensional way. And as Steve is saying in the chat, in the case I focus on everything at once. And and here's the thing, I know what he's talking about. This is where I am, and I'll tell you something, in all seriousness, it was no joke growing up in the 70s and 80s with all this stuff. But if I had to go through that so that I can, and I'm glad I'm on the East Coast too, and I'll tell you why, because when I was, they don't need me on the West Coast. You all are, on this, and there's a million people who have been doing this for a heck of a lot longer than I have. Here on the East Coast, I find, I live right outside the DC area, there's still a lot of shame and a lot of stigma around anything with mental health. I actually like to call it brain health. And I do that so that it's really just a little play on words. But I am telling you, for a lot of the moms and dads that I have who work for the federal government or who work, for some contractor and they have to have a top secret clearance, they don't want their child to have a label that's going to hurt them in the long run. And even though I explain to them what is covered through the ADA, they're so afraid of those labels because of what they grew up with. And I'm like, okay, you need me here because I have to explain to you that even though all of these conditions are in the DSM-5, which we do so that we can have insurance pay for certain things.
DSM stands for?
Oh, I'm sorry, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's part of the American Psychiatric Association.
Just for people out there, be very careful about which DSM you're reading.
Oh my gosh, right.
Like I'm not an expert, but it has changed an insane amount.
And it's controversial too. So for example, when it went from 4 to 5, it took out the Asperger's term for autism. And people were really upset about that. But I'm going to tell you, and I understand why, because they wanted to have that distinction, because it is a spectrum. The reason why they were doing that, though, was because insurance companies, when kids were being called Asperger's, they were denying services. They were denying, different sorts of interventions. So it really I'm not saying it always comes from the best place. I mean, I think it tries to come from the best place. It doesn't always land well, but at least in that particular example, they were trying to make sure that people can get their services covered by insurance. Because for a lot of families, David, I'm actually with a nonprofit social service agency. And I know that
what is your nonprofit called?
Jewish Social Service Agency, but we serve everybody. It just started because, in the beginning when we all immigrated over here, just like with the Irish, just like with anybody else, you had to have your own separate, services and associations because the mainstream wouldn't serve you. So, but we take care of everybody. I love working with a nonprofit that takes insurance because I know for a fact that I'd say almost all of my clients would not be getting any help if they couldn't do it that way.
I also want to have a totally separate conversation with you. We'll do an entire other day just about our insurance system and our healthcare and how absolutely fucked it is that insurance and healthcare does not work for people. And it is really a method for corporations to make money and,
it's awful.
And hospitals barely scrape by and survive.
It's true.
So we will I promise we're going to
can you tell that there's a bunch of ADHD and neurodivergent people having this conversation because we're not staying on task?
So something I want to get back to that we're talking about, I feel like a lot of people, especially people who did grow up in more repressive society area, whether it's pill popping parents or a particularly waspy family, they tend to feel like not to acknowledge their trauma because it makes
it's going to make it worse.
Like a victim, or it's going to make it worse, or they don't even think of it as trauma. The number of times I've sat around, with guys, there's always that one guy who was like, yeah, my dad beat the crap out of me every day, but I'm fine. And within 10 minutes, that dude tries to fight someone.
I know.
I'm like, dude, like, you're not fine. You just tried to fight someone for no reason. Can you tell people what ACE is?
Yes. Okay.
ACE score. And so maybe, give people, especially artists, the chance to like really look at their background and evaluate what trauma is and how it affects them.
I think that's great.
And I'm going to put a disclaimer at the beginning of this episode about all of this as well. I'm not going to do my own trauma dumping.
No. And that's fine. And I think that you sharing what you've experienced and what you've witnessed, we are in the business of storytelling, the artist part of us, that is. And there's a reason why memoirs are so popular, because when someone is telling you that they've been through hell and back, and this is the journey of how they got out, and they want to lend a hand to you, nothing's more powerful. So I don't see it as trauma dumping at all. I really, and I hope I haven't come off that way either.
No, not at all.
I write stories and I listen to stories, and that's really been a theme. I think it's a theme of all of our lives.
Yeah.
Because at heart, we love that connection with people, and we don't always do it well. Sometimes we do it in a really quirky way, but that doesn't mean we don't need it just as much as anybody else. So to answer, so when you said ACE, I was thinking, do you mean the asexual community? Because that was
right.
ACE.
Yeah. No. Right. Yeah. No, adverse childhood event. Is that what's adverse childhood events, correct?
That's exactly right. And you can find those free online. It's really,
yeah.
So here's a couple of different things I'm going to say about that. First of all, what you were talking about with your friend or the guy someone you knew who was, I was fine and look at me and, rah, rah, beating on my chest, and then I'm going to beat someone else up. It's funny, when I went into my gender studies, gender history degree, I was in San Francisco. You can't get any more liberal and like at the heart of the fabulous beast of social, reform than San Francisco, in San Francisco State University. I went in there wanting to learn all about feminism. And one of the things that I came out with is how completely toxic masculinity is. And I feel for men. I really do. I have a lot of hope that, starting a little bit with millennials, but Gen Z, I think, is going to change. I think they're changing the world with that. I think that everything's becoming more gender fluid, and guys are wearing nail polish, and guys are not guys anymore. And I love it, because I'm like, I love it. Beautiful.
I still have a little bit of my last paint job on my toes. That is something I strive for, is to always keep my toes painted, usually a hot pink.
Yes. Well, whatever's in your color family that works for you, then whatever brings you joy.
And the number of times people look at me like, oh, you're gay? And I was like,
no.
Oh, I didn't realize you could tell someone's sexuality by their toenail polish.
It's so funny, because I always still think, that's me making this general stereotype of California, is that everyone sort of is with it. And that's not necessarily true.
No.
So
yeah, we're just because we're more with it doesn't mean we're with it.
I think that should be a bumper sticker. Just because we're more with it doesn't mean we're with it, all with it. To answer your question, I think a lot of generations, including Gen X, which I am part of, there is a bit of this, I'm trying to think of the way to phrase it, almost this gravitas of, I was juggling with knives and buying my mom cigarettes at 3 years old, and got the shit beaten out of me. And I am to tell it. And all of you, the rest of you, are whiners. There is a little bit of that, because there's this pride that you sort of survived, you survived the war.
Which is perfectly valid. You did survive, and you came out as a mostly functioning human being, and you should be applauded for that.
Absolutely. However, right, here's the wild thing, is that you could have the same family, and one kid who just has whatever natural resilience and resourcefulness, and for whatever reason, mom and dad wanting to kill each other, it wasn't great, but they figured out something else, and they're basically, they're functioning, they truly are fine for whatever reason. And then you have the other kid, maybe only 2 years younger or older, who that just rocked their world. And because we're built differently, we have different sorts of sensitivity, we have different sorts of capacity. And just because someone happens to be a little bit more sensitive to, oh, I don't know, yelling, screaming, fighting, violence, inappropriate touching, whatever the heck it is, does not make them weaker.
Exactly. Well, it's all about our brain chemistry, right? Like some people can do cocaine and
Yes,
it doesn't do anything for them, and some people do it once and they're addicted.
that's a great example.
There is no objective truth to brain chemistry, right? Because it's all brain chemistry. It's all
It's brain
everything.
chemistry, and there's no morality with it.
Personally, I have a fairly addictive personality, and I
Yep.
have been addicted to a few things. Not that I've ever needed treatment.
No, I got you.
That's part of my genetics.
Yep.
On the other hand, I tried cocaine, and I was like, that's a really unpleasant feeling down the back of my throat. I'm just going to drink energy drinks. I'll just chug a couple of those. It's not for me. To each their own. I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum, but be careful, guys. They're putting fentanyl in everything now. Weird.
I mean, we lost Prince because of that. Geez, sorry, that was just, that one hit hard. But anyway, my point is that, and there's a lot of amazing people that we are losing to that. That's a whole other discussion in terms of with drug use and self-medication and what have you. I will tell you this. So I was very anti-medicine for a long time. I mentioned my Valley of the Dolls sort of upbringing. And then I got into my 40s. And I got to tell you something. I did a lot of cognitive behavioral strategies without knowing that they were CBT strategies. From the time I was in my teens, that got me through college and got me through grad school.
Can you please describe some CBT strategies
Yeah,
and generally what cognitive behavioral therapy is?
absolutely. So cognitive behavioral therapy started with, I think it's Aaron Beck, but it's definitely Beck, Beck, who basically came up with a way to, if you can reframe your actions, you can reframe your thoughts, and then you can reframe your belief system. Trying to get to the belief system, the actual motivation sometimes is probably one of the most elusive mistresses. And so Beck and his daughter, Judith, they basically use CBT for everything. It's a more short-term solution-oriented therapy. So insurance companies love them. So we could talk about that and something else. I like CBT, and I call CBT sort of the fabulous donut of therapy. And what I mean by that, it's going to address sort of all the surrounding issues. But if there is significant trauma or significant neurodiversity functioning, you might need to dig a little deeper, and you might need to have some auxiliary or other sorts of modalities. I don't believe in ever just doing one modality when it comes to therapy. But anyway, with CBT, so a perfect example, one is called the Pomodoro effect. It doesn't necessarily say it's CBT, but it is. The Pomodoro effect is a study method that coaches love to give to kids. So let's say you're going to study, the brain really can only focus for 20 minutes at a time. After that, you're just sort of, you're wandering off and you're sort of zoning out and you're disassociating. So what they say is, okay, put a timer on for 20 minutes and study for 20 minutes and really focus. Don't have any of the nonsense that you have, unless of course you're ADHD and you need some white noise, that's fine. And then when the alarm goes off, you can do now they only say for two or 3 minutes or 5 minutes to take off. Sometimes I would need longer, 10 minutes, to do something that is the more favorable activity. It's the carrot.
I think that works as adults as well. I have to do that.
Absolutely.
I start, I'm working on something that bores the crap out of me. I'm like, I'm gonna go sit on my patio and just enjoy that, or watch a little bit of a TV show or something, just to reset my brain. But I didn't know there was a term for it. What it's called? It's called the what? The what effect?
Pomodoro. It sounds Italian, doesn't it? The Pomodoro.
I want to eat it. I know
hungry. You want to eat it. You want to live it. And but I was doing that before I even realized that was a method. For example, another one would be reframing is another big one in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I think it's actually something that we use in positive behavioral therapy. There's it's used for a lot. So a reframe would be, wow, I really had wanted to, I suck at this subject and I only got a 79 on a test. A reframe would be, yeah, but you were failing this class in the beginning of the term. And now, it's progress, not perfection. You're getting there. You're learning more. To do it in a way that's not a toxic positivity way.
Yeah, well, I think to steal from one of my interview idols, Dak Shepard on Armchair Expert.
Indeed.
He says you can really only, through his therapy, you really only can compare yourself to your previous self.
That's exactly
comparing
right.
yourself to other people is just a fool's errand and a trip to insanity. trip to feeling worse about yourself?
It just doesn't make any sense to me. And even in my darkest moments, I may admire certain things about other people. I might have had a velvet envy, of,
Mhm.
hey, I'm glad they have it. I'd like it for myself. But I still always wanted to be me. And I know that there are other people out there who sometimes don't feel that way. And that's a whole other show indeed. But so the point is that I sort of white knuckled a lot of my life in terms of getting through. I flunked out of college actually the first time. Thank you, clinical major depressive
So white
disorder.
knuckling is like when you hang on for dear life, where
Yes,
technically you're surviving and you're getting through it, but you're doing it by basically just tensing your body and mind up at all times.
you're doing it through fear and terror for the
Yeah,
most part,
or
and
drugs or whatever other unhealthy coping mechanisms you have.
whatever it is, exactly. And so for me, I got into my 40s and I had moved from San Francisco to Northern Virginia. I was not very happy about it. I was just coming out of, frankly, a very deep depression episode. I had been on the upswing until this move. And then for whatever reason, I don't know if you've ever had a clinical depression, but you can literally sort of almost feel yourself falling.
Yep. Yeah.
It's really awful. I don't wish it on anybody. And I had the very brief thought, and I've never had that before. My girls, I have two daughters, they would be better off without me. Scared the shit out of me. Called up my husband, and I was like, yeah, I'm in trouble. And I went to the one of the heads of Georgetown Hospital just to have a, just to just talk about getting on medicine. And of
Mhm.
course, he was like, well, have you prayed? And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? You're at
Fuck you, buddy.
Georgetown Medical.
Fuck you. I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah,
unabashedly there.
absolutely. No, you could please say
Inappropriate.
I couldn't get, I mean, but here's the thing I want to say to people. It is like dating. Finding the right doctor,
Yeah.
finding the right medicine. It took me 3 doctors until I
Mhm.
found someone I actually respected and trusted. And then it took us to find like the third or fourth medicine until I found the one that I'm on now. And I think a lot of people, first of all, they're very scared to get on anything. They think it's going to change who they are. All
Mhm.
I could tell you, it's made me the best version of myself.
So this
Um,
this actually gets into something that I really want to focus on, because especially with actors, writers, and musicians, we have
yes.
this feeling where if we don't hold on to our trauma and pain, that we can't make good art. And
Bullshit.
and there's a weird short answer is bullshit, of course.
Bullshit. Well,
Because
but that is a very, as
yeah,
because they don't want to lose their edge, and I
yeah.
get it. And I'm sorry, I didn't even mean to interrupt you. That's my
No, no,
ADHD
please
stuff.
do. It's just, I think that that there's a weird line between the fact that yes, great art can come from trauma,
Yes.
and you can turn that trauma into art. And I don't want to talk about your art therapy next and how you feel about that and how you use
Yeah.
it. But that, like for me, I went through a really bad breakup in college. Like cried myself to sleep a lot
Yep.
at night. Dyed my hair black. It was
Yep.
awful. Just like I was way too emo. But I wrote amazing poetry. Like I wrote probably the best poetry of my life. And I
Yep.
really thought that like, oh, I can't write poetry like that again if I'm not in that headspace. And
I
that's just
totally get that. But let's
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about that because that's it's a legitimate fear until it's not
One
legitimate.
second. My cat is
Oh, there's the
on the
baby.
I've heard bear before.
That's okay. I
Bear
have
has some pretty severe separation anxiety.
listen, COVID cat, right?
Oh yeah.
So what you were saying is like about that whole thing in terms of edge, in terms of creativity. Absolutely, we can feel really creative. There's a bit of that creative spark that comes from deep pain, and
Mhm.
there's a well that we draw from, which is part of the collective conscious and unconsciousness with that, and we do get to dig deeper. So yes, there is. I get why that is um, an alluring idea, and I'm not going to say that you shouldn't use those times. If you can use them for something creative, great. Sometimes I'm at that place where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to eat my feelings and watch bad TV. So I would have loved to still get back into writing or what have you. But here's the thing. It's not, if you want to have a career, if you want to have a long-standing, healthy, hopefully eventually income-producing career, you have to be reliable. You have to meet your deadlines. You have to be someone that people want to work with. You have to be able to understand what your creative process is and understand that sometimes you are not going to feel like writing or painting or singing or whatever it is. But if you've got a project that's coming, or if you have, people are counting on you.
Yeah.
And that's when all of a sudden you're doing really dull stuff like going to bed early and or going to bed at the time that you can get your 8 hours, and you're being on a structure and you're taking your meds and you're doing that stupid mental health walk that you don't feel like taking. You're doing all those things so that frankly that your best self can come out. I totally get that allure, but I also think it's been a really bad stereotype and trope to get away with bad behavior,
Totally. And to allow you to wallow in your own trauma. There are people who have been like,
or to inflict it on others.
Yeah. Well, what if I stop doing hair and I won't be able to write music as well? Bullshit. Like, you still have that trauma, you still have the shit you deal with, you still have everything in your head. And while you may not have like the same like insane feeling of creativity, you will make good art. Every artist will tell you this. Every artist who felt like they couldn't be healthy and sane and make good art, who became healthy and sane, said, oh yeah, I'm making good art. It feels different when I do it.
Yes.
But I'm still making the best art of my life.
Well, what you're touching on is that the making of the art when you're feeling like, for like shit, or you're high, or you're really depressed, that is a drug in itself. Listen, we're all running towards the dopamine. We all love the dopamine and the norepinephrine and the serotonin. I get it. I'm scrolling TikTok. Another part of the sciencey part of what we're talking about, B.F. Skinner was a behaviorist, and he's really known for the whole sort of Pavlov's dog and, how do you get, the dog to salivate without even the food being there because he just hears the bell. Basically, intermittent reward systems, IRS is the way to think about it. That's TikTok, for example. I don't know if it's going to be the next TikTok I see or the 100th TikTok I see that's going to really either move me or make me laugh or what have you. I don't know so I'm going to keep scrolling. It's the same thing they use in casinos. It's the same things that they use.
A lot like gambling. Yeah.
Gambling, video games, things like that. And the ones that use the intermittent, reward systems, that is life. That is what we're trying to do. And here's the thing also about making art is TikTok equals dopamine casino. Oh, I love that.
That's great,
I was reading that from Steve. A lot of what we make is art, whether we're high or whether we're depressed or whether we're actually on a good mental health structured journey. 70 to 80% of it's going to be crap the first time we make it. I think that we have this other illusion. I call it gifted kid syndrome, and I can't begin to when I did educational counseling, which was just a fancy way of saying tutoring to get myself through grad school. I would have these parents call me in a panic because their kids got a freaking B, and like, oh my gosh, Susie or Ahmed is not going to get into Harvard or what have you. Meantime, parents didn't even go to Harvard, but whatever, I digress. Right. And I would meet with them, and really what it was is that it wasn't that they were bad at English or history or anything, but they were so good at getting everything so fast, that something that took 2 or 3 or 4 times to get, they automatically assumed they were bad at it and they would stop. Mm-hmm. I think the same thing happens with, and I say this, amateur artists, meaning people who haven't been doing it for a long time, is that you think that you're supposed to always have this bolt of lightning. You get a lot of freaking lightning bugs that you have to sort of weave together in order to simulate lightning in a sense, Well,
it's also interesting that we describe all of this as art, but so much of what you do as a professional artist is a combination of art and a craft. It's an actual skill you have to work on. If you're a writer, look, you can write the best book of your life and then write crap books again. You have to write things over and over and over. You have to, as an actor, I have to work on my voice. I have to work on my delivery.
You have a fantastic voice, by the way.
Thank you so much.
You really do. I'm like riveted by it. I'm like, what do I need to buy now? Like, you can make me buy anything with that voice. I'm just saying, go ahead.
Even me, like, if people talk about self-conscious, I did a radio show for 5 years called The Drama Hour at KZSE, and I had to listen to myself back. I hated the sound of my own voice. Yes. It took me years to do that. You're not snowflakes.
No. I get it.
We are all individuals, but we all go through the same shit. We all deal with trauma. If you think that no one else has experienced what you experienced, you think too highly of yourself.
I agree.
And
I love the cat's tail just went through. Sorry. Just as you were making this great point, it was like this.
Yeah.
It was just
he has a way of doing that.
bear. I'm not now a bear fan. So there you
awesome.
go.
Well, if you ever come by, you'll be more. He's the cuddliest cat on earth. He's the only cat. I brought him to the vet, and they told me to put him in a carrier, and I said no, he'll freak out. Walked past all the dogs, was just holding him the entire time. And as the vet was checking him out, jumped into the vet's arms, onto his shoulders, and he was like, "Well, I've never seen that before. Can I interview now, baby cat?" Something I wanted to talk about. We talked about trauma and how people, trauma dump. They try to trauma bond with each other. They think that trauma is the key to their success. But the other side of that is coping mechanisms and ways to deal with that. So if you need mental help, there are hotlines, and I know you worked for a mental health hotline before.
Yes, I did.
And there are hotlines if you need to call them. I will have them in the show notes. There are free mental health things that I will put in there. And if you have any sort of insurance, you can almost always do a teledoc with a mental health professional. It's something that I do occasionally. And
they're really popular.
It doesn't make you crazy to do it. Just have someone to talk to is great.
I don't think you can get an agent in LA unless you're in therapy. I think that's just what the rules should be.
I think that should be a new law. SAB should pass that. You have to see a therapist at least once a month.
You bring up an excellent point about not just in terms of trauma dumping and coping mechanisms, and we're going to talk about that. Trauma as identity is something that's really sticky to talk about. And, watch, I'll get canceled before I'm even anything, but that's okay.
It's funny, we actually just had a show about getting canceled. And I'd love to.
I got canceled before. I got canceled. I'll talk about that another time. But
awesome.
And listen, again, open freaking book with the trauma dump. So there is a point when I hate the word journey. I feel so Oprah saying it, but frick it, we're going to just say it. So part of the process with trauma, there's a while where you're just trying to survive it, right? We said you're living it. You are in a constant fight or flight mode with your brain, which means that your whole nervous system is in an adrenaline cycle, up and down, up and down. So you're in it. You're in this constant fight or flight, which, by the way, it's actually there's flight, there's fight, there's fleeing, and there's also something that they've just added on, which is fawning, which was my favorite. Fawning is when you are going to do whatever you can to befriend, be in good graces of your perpetrator, whether that's the parent, a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, whoever is inflicting any sort of trauma, abuse, what have you. It's the kid who sort of is the golden child a lot of times in families. You have your black sheep that everyone talks about, which I hate using the word black sheep because whatever, but the one who's the instigator, the one who's poking everyone saying, hey, this isn't right. Hey, this kind of, by the way, that's the truth teller of a family. Yeah. That's the one
who isn't accepting the status quo.
That's exactly right. And the golden child has gotten a lot of safety, security, and identity by aligning themselves with their abuser. And so it's really hard to break that for them. But let's just say, fine, you're going through your survival. You've had these little moments of, hey, this isn't right, but I'm just trying to get through it, whether you're conscious or not. Eventually, then you're at a point where you're not constantly in that survival mode. Maybe you've gone to college. Maybe you got your first apartment. Whatever the heck it is, you are, for whatever reason, you're not under the yoke of that environment anymore. Your nervous system doesn't know what to do with itself because it's used to chaos as a norm. And so first things that are going to happen is you're probably going to have a lot of relationships that are very chaos driven, that are actually very reminiscent of, frankly, what you were just trying to get away from. And by the way, on the surface, that person could look totally different than what you came from. But
we're inherently drawn to situations and people that come from our own trauma.
We're animals. We smell certain things. We have certain instincts for people. And that's where a lot of trauma bonding comes in. And listen, I could share my own freaking stories. They make good stories. But anyway, but the point is that you think that person is your soulmate, that is your person. And really, it's based on a trauma bond. Here's the thing about the brain. It's so smart and so freaking stupid at the same time. The brain is designed not for your happiness, but for your survival and for the status quo and for homeostasis. And if homeostasis for you was freaking chaos and yelling, screaming, violence of any kind, then that is what it considers its norm. So it takes years to not only retrain your brain, like you can intellectually know, hey, it doesn't feel good when my girlfriend sits there and calls me a piece of crap and throws things at me and then apologizes. That whole cycle. But again, that's what you know. Eventually, that's when you're in therapy, hopefully. And that is when you are rebuilding the foundations of your emotional, spiritual, and psychological house. And for a while, relationships might actually look boring, the ones that are healthy. And guess what? When people say to me, how are you doing? And I said, I'm boring, I'm happy. But it takes a while for the brain to accept that that's the new norm. You have to actually build new neurotransmitters in your brain. So that's get now to what you were asking about coping skills, right? So there's different types of coping skills. I think that there's the kind that are just sort of going to get you through that moment. Like, okay, I know that if I can do my deep yoga breaths, that I'm not going to go into a panic attack.
Common breathing for panic attacks is 3-5-6. Is that correct?
Or 4-7-8. Listen, it's whatever, it's
whatever works for you. But in general, just as a coping mechanism, if you breathe in for 3 seconds, hold for 5, then breathe out for 8, or whatever numbers, feels comfortable with you.
Yes.
It's a great way to, if you're in a situation, to just force your heart and your brain to come back to closer to homeostasis.
It really is so true. And it's accessible and you can do it anywhere, and you don't, I love a fidget just like anyone else does. That's my little coping. In fact,
what I'm doing right now, I'm literally playing with something as we're speaking. And that's why sometimes
I am playing with my little eraser. And I got to tell you something. It's one of the things I love about things online, because I do it. And like my clients don't see that I'm like sitting here stretching or what have you. But yeah, this is what I do for my, to get out my little nervous energy. So you have these different coping mechanisms, and that's great. You can't just live for coping mechanisms. You have to do the work of, frankly, mourning what you wanted and what you deserved. There's this primordial contract that I think that this is more of on a collective unconscious sort of Carl Jung, Carolyn Meese. I think we have soul contracts. And I think that we have in our DNA what we consider sort of our primordial contracts with our caregivers. And it's that you're going to make sure that I'm safe and warm and fed, and that I'm going to be loved. And when, for whatever reason, something on those basic levels doesn't happen, and for a lot of people, it can be the basics of I clothed you, I fed you, what have you. But for whatever reason, maybe there was a parent who was in a clinical depression themselves and they just couldn't connect with the kid. And that's all attachment disorder stuff. That's a whole other show. Then that child, there's this schism that happens where something that was supposed to be your basic need and frankly basic right wasn't given. And you have to mourn that just as if you would mourn anything else. And you have to, there's a lot of deep work that can be done in therapy where you are in your mind attending to that child of whatever age, or whether it's a kid, little one, whether it's a teen, whether it's you yesterday. We have to learn to parent ourselves. We have to learn to be there for ourselves and to love ourselves, not in spite of our neurodivergence or our quirkiness, or, how many of us were said, wow, you're a lot. You're a lot. It's, I love you, but I don't always, yeah, exactly. What that says to a kid is you're too much for me. And that means then you're going to be too much for anybody.
Yeah. It also comes from your friend group as well. That also comes from your peers. You have to realize that form of brain rewiring and trauma comes from a lot of different places. Your parents, it's a lot of different worlds. Okay, I think maybe coping mechanisms is the wrong word. I think what I wanted to get into, and something I want to bring Stephen pretty soon about, is closer to like what you would consider therapy, like art therapy, or using art as not just a way to cope, but a way to actually heal and move forward. So I think maybe if you could just go over some basic techniques on ways to use art, and as artists, ways that we can move forward.
I think it's great. Okay, so first of all, art therapy, I'd be negligent if I didn't say this. It is its own discipline within the mental health profession. Usually it requires a special training, a special,
art therapy isn't just you doing art and it being therapeutic.
exactly.
Art therapy is its own thing, though you can also use art as therapy. So
Absolutely. And so I'm always very, I come from a family of artists. I do a lot of visual art myself, much more as an avocation versus a vocation. But I love to do that, especially with kids but for any of us who did not learn the language of emotions, there's a lot of different words out there and we can feel 5 or 10 things at the same time. And that's very confusing. So something that gets you out of your head. The longer I'm going on, David, with this whole, journey of mine from being the client to being the therapist, and it has been the work of my life in the most joyous sense to do that. But I'll tell you something, like talk therapy is going to get you maybe halfway there. That's if you're lucky. It is a combination of art and somatic therapies. And I'll explain more what I mean by that. That's really going to get you home. And because the body is the first brain, the body will hold on to joys and trauma forever, and unless you let it out. And so let's say, so art therapy was the first one you asked. I love mandala work, as long as we acknowledge that from the origins of it, the socio-cultural and religious origins within India of where it comes from. I like to always make sure to honor the people where it came from. Mine is a bastardized version of it, but whether I have them draw ones from scratch or whether I give them little cutouts and they can put it together or draw it. It's almost, I used to do mosaics as an artist, and my therapist was like, "Oh, I love that. You're taking different pieces of yourselves and putting yourself back together." And I was like, "Can't I just like the pretty little pieces? Can't I not have it be that?" But she was right, of course.
Yeah. Sorry, really, really briefly to cut in.
Yes.
What's your feeling on the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk?
I think it's genius. I think it's a great book. Now I've been hearing I don't know how substantiated, I've been hearing some things that he's had some issues with some coworkers or what have you, in terms of creating some trauma, in terms of some sexually inappropriate behavior. And, it breaks your heart when you hear this, because we're so quick to maybe make heroes because we have so few.
Yeah. And make villains because they feel so good.
That's right.
We're all, except for Nazis, we're all just a bunch of
exactly.
And that's not to, there's a difference. I want to bring up that there's a difference between explaining behavior and excusing it.
Exactly.
And people often say, well, his excuse is, but that really what they mean is the reason behind his thinking or their thinking, her thinking, whichever, it's different. And so just because you're giving a reason for something and you understand where someone is coming from doesn't mean that you excuse their behavior or them taking out their trauma on the rest of the world.
I'm so glad you said that, because we were talking about this earlier and that was something I wanted to bring up, and then I forgot because, ADHD. So thank you so much for bringing up that point. I think that's a lot of what, when people come into therapy, they're like, trauma is complicated. People are complicated. And you have someone that you love really so much, and yet they've hurt you in this way. And so you get a lot of people, or with friends, for example, that you care about them and they love you, but they really hurt you. And so there's this natural, you have to understand from their point of view, and absolutely you can do that. But first you got to acknowledge how you were hurt.
Yeah.
You can hear, that's assuming you're getting the apology, right? Sometimes you don't get the apology. The hardest thing I ever had to do was forgive someone who never asked for forgiveness in the first place. But I did that for me. I didn't do that for them.
Right.
The kind of apology is important. So I think that and this happens a lot in my couples therapy, is like, I'll hear someone say, "Well, I said, I'm sorry. What else do they want from me?" So here's what I do. This is how I do it.
Okay.
You first have to hear somebody without interrupting, right? You got to let them say what they need to say. If you need to make notes because you want to make sure to address some things, that's fine. Whatever helps you. And then then there's I don't want to say it's the reflection necessarily, or just the repetition. But then I think it's very important for the person who has been accused or what have you to say, so what you're saying is, I did this, this, and this, and this is how it hurt you. And there's an important piece, that's an imago therapy, by the way, piece to it. is to make sure you're actually saying the same thing. I can't begin to tell you, David, how you think that you're saying something really clearly and how your partner hears it in a very different way. And so, and just that first exercise, that sometimes will take a whole session just to get through that, because we have to make sure that they're on the same page. Now you assume that they're on the same page. Then they have to say, I am really sorry that I did this to you. This is how I hurt you. And I am acknowledging that I did this. If and when you're ready, I would like to share what was going on with me. But this is how I can promise that I'm going to rectify it in the future. Because without the action, the promise, the what have you, doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's important. And then when the person's ready, saying, okay, no, I do want to hear what you were thinking, because I can't imagine what the heck you were thinking when you said this or did this.
Yeah.
And them saying, again, doesn't excuse it, but this is what I was going through. That doesn't excuse what I did and how I hurt you.
Right.
Now, how can we figure out a way to make sure this doesn't happen in the future? That takes a lot of putting down your sword and shields and the ego, and just trying to get to the heart of the solution and the love.
Yeah.
And it takes people a long time sometimes to get there.
I'm going to be a hippy dippy a little bit and say that those apologies that we learn how to make to our partners are the same apologies we have to make to ourselves.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Apologize to ourselves for, I was recently talking to a friend, and they just had a lot of shame because they were in a situation they felt like they should have gotten out of.
Yeah.
And I said, you don't know what it's like to be in a situation until you're in the situation. You don't know how to deal with it until you've dealt with it.
Yeah.
And there's no point in holding on to shame about not knowing how to be the person you are right now. Like, you are a different person than you were then, and you've learned things, and you have to accept the apology of like your old self and say it's okay. Forgive yourself.
That takes a long time.
I want to start talking about like techniques that have worked for Steve and I, and that you know for art. And I think that's a really great place to use in your art. I think that as you write lyrics, as you write poetry, as you play an instrument or work on a script or act, that's a great place for you to look at your emotions and realize that you were a character in a story that also deserves compassion and love. And that kind of outside perspective, the same way that playing a sport is super healthy because it takes you outside of your mind into your physical body.
Yeah.
Doing art is really important because it gets you out of your own ego. I'm not sure I'm using these terms, change a lot, and I'm not an expert.
Don't even worry about it. You're just talking from your heart. That's just go
out and getting outside of your ego and looking at yourself in a more objective and compassionate way. And I would love to kind of the end of the conversation to be about how we can do art for that, and how when things like trauma happen to us now, or being in a lockdown, and how that can cause or exacerbate mental issues, and the current and the traumas we're in, how we can continue using our art to deal with that and help give us perspective. So we're going to bring back Steve Brock. Could you give us like 3 or 5 things that as artists that Steve and I personally and everyone listening can help to use our art in a healthy way?
Yeah.
Do you have some like techniques you could give us?
I do.
Okay.
I do. So let's just do 3, because that's people like things in 3s. Automatic writing is one of the best ones, that you put on some candles or low lighting enough where you can still see, whether you write with your dominant hand or not. I would suggest that you don't do it with a typewriter unless you need that as an accommodation. Then go ahead, a typewriter. I'm sounding like I'm 80, on your laptop.
Yeah.
I love old-fashioned laptop. And then you're going to do some deep breathing, like we talked about, some of that yoga breath. Sometimes there's a square breath. There's different. You can look those up. We can do links for that. No problem. The whole point is to start to get into more of a delta wave space. That's the part of your brain which taps into the creativity. And then you just write without thinking. You can start with some questions if you want, or you can leave it freestyle. Really, you're trying to almost access your higher self. For that, some people that's higher self, some people that's source, God, however you want to call it. It's something that you're tapping into a collective energy that's greater than yourself, but that you are a part of. Mm-hmm. And some people like to do it with a purpose in terms of with their healing. Some people want to do it as a conversation, and some people just want to see what comes up. give yourself time to get used to it. It takes time to, first of all, we have a bit of this capitalistic brainwash that everything that we're writing has to be something that ends up being marketable.
Yeah.
And I am guilty of that too. When you're doing something for the purpose of healing, that doesn't mean that you can't use some of that nuggets for something else. But when you're sitting down there, that is not your purpose.
Yeah.
You are having a conversation with your soul.
Even as an artist too, I've written professionally, and give yourself, again, I'm stealing from Dak Shepard, give yourself permission to have a really poor first, second, and third draft.
Absolutely.
Like, the things you write, the way learning is about the process. You know, we really want to move to being more process oriented. Results on a small scale, results don't matter, process matters. So let yourself just go through the process.
Beautifully said.
I did a one-person show about a couple of pieces of trauma in my life a few years ago. And one of the things that the coach she teaches for one-person shows did free writing at the beginning, quite like what you were talking about. It was interesting how I was able to come up with a one-person show based on what you just mentioned. I never really worried about what was coming out. I just wanted it to come out, and that's really interesting to hear it from that perspective.
Absolutely. And I love that that's something that helped you with something so creative and that you ended up having a product out of it. But the truth is that the more real, the more raw, the more authentic that we are, you will definitely heal because you're telling the truth. We all have to tell the truth, at least just to ourselves. Beyond that, that's up to you. And good art, any of it, the stuff that at least lasts, is something that has a relatability and an unveiling on a part of ourselves that, especially as a reader, as an audience member, that you almost sort of like, sometimes you hear that sort of like, oh, kind of giggle because someone's like, oh shit, I can't believe they said that, because they've been thinking it their whole lives and they just didn't have the guts to say it, but you did,
Right.
But at the time when you're doing it, you can't be worried about what's going to be for the stage. You just have to be like, and also to ask yourself, I think if everyone was to sit there and say, and I'll get into the second and third, I promise. If you were to sit there and say, what do you think is your monster? What do you think is the ugliest, most irredeemable part of you? Because I've asked that. I've met those monsters that I have. And here's the thing, you got to love them. You got to love the ugly that's in you, because the ugly in you actually ends up having its own kind of beauty. And it all comes from somewhere.
I think that's actually a really deep part of acting, is if you truly embody an acting role, especially for a film that's going on for a long period of time or a play, is that you have to not just understand what you're coming from, but believe it. And even if you hate yourself, you have to be a real person that you fully understand.
Yep.
So, I played someone who was going into schizophrenia, and I had to make that my reality and my mindset and love that person as well. And I played really awful people, and I had to tap into the awful things that my own awful impulses, and really understand them and love them.
Yes.
So at least for me, it's scary, but it's necessary. And I think that part of acting and being outside of yourself and realizing that you're not outside of yourself, it's all shit that's just you, is really powerful and kind of scary.
Did you find that too as well, Steve?
I did a lot. I've had to portray different characters. I mean, it was a comedy movie, but I played a stalker. I mean, he was harmless kind of stalker, but definitely had his own sets of rules, and definitely a creepy person if in reality. But I had to find that I had to find the heart within that person in order for me to love that person. But also within the going to the one-person show I mentioned, technically I was playing a role that was very close to myself doing this. So I had to, in much that same way, love the person I was portraying on stage, and giving myself that gift of being able to be brave enough to share that part of me to people. And yeah, that's definitely something I have to do a lot.
That's not easy.
I lost about 100 pounds because was sick. I was on the verge of diabetes, so I lost 100 pounds. And during the process, I had this real thought of, who am I when I'm healthy? If you talking about identity,
Yes.
and you so identify with being on a serotonin spectrum of whatever, identifying with ADHD, identifying as having autistic tendency, identifying with OCD, et cetera, but also just the physical manifestation of all that was being at 350 pounds. I had that actual discussion of, what am I? Who am I if I'm not sick? Who am I if I've lost that identity? And I wouldn't mind it if you talked about that at some point, because I think that actually does focus a little bit on what David was talking about with using art through therapy. I mean, mine was very specifically talking about, I was sexually assaulted, and an emotional assault happened later in my life. They were very related, and I used the show to work through it and use that as therapy. That's a very actual way to talk about art therapy, but
Yes.
I wouldn't mind you talking about that. I'm sure this is a common thing, people who are needing to go through therapy, or in general, people who are on a neurodiversity spectrum. They're so identified with their neurodiversity,
Yes.
that it becomes their outbound identity.
That's right.
So, and then people avoid therapy because of that. Extreme version of that, you get Janis Joplin, who refuses to give up drugs because she thinks she's going to stop writing. Even more so, I think, having that healthiness of going through therapy, it's not a way to skirt around your neurodiversity, but it is a way to have that therapy through it. People are afraid that they will stop being who they are.
Such a great point, Steve. There are some people who will still go to therapy. How do I put this? Let's just say it's neurodivergence as identity. First of all, you go from this place of denial and shame to acceptance and then integration, which is what you want. Part of the acceptance stage, sometimes it will go into going from such a shame perspective. Sometimes we do a 180, right? And that is normal. That is part of, I hate the word fucking normal, but whatever. That is expected.
It is well within the bell curve.
There we go.
I always say, I don't want to be normal. Who wants to be average?
I totally agree with you. What happens is that you go from denial and, hey, I'm fine the way it is, or I don't have this problem, to, oh no, actually I have, ADHD, and I have OCD, and I have an ASD, and all that other stuff. And I will say also that certain generations are definitely more label friendly, that they like to have those labels because it is this natural connector to identity and tribe. So I totally get that. But then that's supposed to be then the point when you start to find your way to your new homeostasis, right? I like that even better, because that's what your balance.
Homeostasis, yeah.
New
Homeostasis means same balance. Homeo,
Exactly.
Homo meaning same, stasis
Exactly.
meaning state, same state. So when your body's homeostasis is when your resting heart rate and all of your humors, all of your chemistry is essentially in line and functioning as it normally does.
Beautiful.
Normal for you. If we could just get to kind of your last two techniques. So our first one was free writing. Is that what you called it?
Automatic writing, free writing, either of those terms work.
Okay.
You can use
Also,
those.
Jack Kerouac did not write On the Road by free writing. He
No.
edited that. That is a myth. That is a lie. You do not have to be Jack Kerouac, and you don't have to take acid. Although in therapeutic sessions, hallucinogenics and K-holes using ketamine can be very powerful as well.
And I'm not against some of that stuff. We can get that into another time. So then second method, believe it or not, in terms of an art therapy method, it's almost like there's a couple of different ways to do it. Either you could do it with a free flow. It's actually an automatic writing with just art, where you're taking a pen, a marker, and you're scribbling. And like you're literally saying, okay, for the next 10 seconds, 15 seconds, you're going to scribble. And then when you stop it, you're going to see what sort of pictures or things that you can either see or color in them, and you can make that its own new art piece. And
I had no clue that was art therapy. I've been doing that for years. I might have actually learned that in therapy as a child and forgot about it.
Absolutely. And All of these, by the way, are conduits for getting into the subconscious, for conduits to get into the deeper healing. There are also, like, speaking of, I was playing around with my little bandy eraser, doing a lot of clay work. This is where you're marrying an art therapy with a somatic therapy. Somatic means somo for the body. Body therapies with art therapies are my jam. So for example, let's just say you were doing some clay work. Clay work is amazing because it's malleable. You can fix it. You can, keep doing it. I actually have a lot of the little ones start off making snakes, and we stretch them and we do whatever. And they can, whether they decide to make a pot out of it, whether they decide to make a plate, whether they decide to make their own little kingdoms, what have you. There is divisions of play therapy, which are very similar to art therapy, where you have the sand trays with all the little, miniature, dinosaurs and wizards and what have you. And to me, that is art therapy as well. And I think that there should be adult versions of it too, because
I think that jam sessions are that version. I think
right.
I suck at playing instruments. I know Steve is an actual musician, but I own a keyboard, a guitar, a ukulele, and a harmonica. I don't play any of them well, but I love doing it. I love having people over and jamming it, even if I'm just strumming on a chord. I think that creative writing as a group, I think that jam sessions, I think that
those are all art therapies as far as I'm concerned.
Blue Sky creating TV shows are all form of play therapy. That's all things that we can use as artists to also get together.
I think that I am at my most creative when I am with other creative people. I've decided as I've gotten older, I absolutely need it, because otherwise there's some part of me that just doesn't feel good. I will say this, that with your music therapy that you were doing there is something to that. For example, the different vibrations of the music that are going through your body actually correlate with the level of the sound of the megahertz. Your heart has its own megahertz. Your gut, your stomach, your brain has its own vibration. And that can correlate with your chakras. One of the most effective therapies that I've ever done that I have no words for, and I don't know why it worked, but it did, is sound baths. And it sounds very California, where you got those big crystal bowls or the Tibetan bowls, and they're doing it at a certain pitch. And they do it, the pitches that are in correlation with your chakras. And I mean, you go from the sacral chakra all the way up through the crown chakra. I don't know why it works, but I had a physical problem that I was dealing with that I suspected had a bit of a psychosomatic base for it. And doctors, whatever, you're fine, or that's part of the other conditions you have. And I'm like, this is something different. It was certain things with certain kinds of back pain where I didn't really have a reason to have it. The areas that it was close to the sacral chakra, which is all about sexuality. And I did a series of sound baths, just stuff I got off of Spotify, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binaries and everyone else. And for whatever reason, my gut told me to hold on to the sound bath that was for the sacral chakra. And I did that with just some stretches. And I must have been holding in a lot of my own trauma. And I just started to bawl, and I did the stretch, and the pain was gone.
So I just want to really briefly bring up that art therapy and a lot of things that we do to help ourselves are a lot like body hacking, where you base things on, this is one of the few times you base things on the result and not on the process. You may not know why it works, but it works for you. You don't have to subscribe to any particular ideology. And sometimes it's better not to, and to actually be wary of ideologies. But using parts of them can be really powerful, and accept the fact that they work for you, and don't give away all your money to any sort of major corporation or people who ask for it or belief system. But if it works for you, it works for you, and don't feel bad about it.
Well,
I'll say this. I agree with that, but I'm going to add a little addendum that's important.
Please do.
I think that a lot of that, and I need to do more study on it, but I believe anything with chakras and sacral systems and things like that, that is from a lot of Hindi and ancient Indian belief systems and religions and practices, as well as yoga and all those other things. I don't need to be Hindi. I don't need to be, but I always want to acknowledge it because we whitewash a lot of crap. And I think that healing comes from some very ancient Hindi practices. And I'm going to learn more about it just so I can give credit where credit's due. I was actually looking for a Kundalini yoga class for myself because I think of the world of it. I did it years ago. I couldn't find a class around me. It was all like, oh, for core strength, for a better butt. Where is just like hatha yoga, Kundalini yoga? I don't want to gatekeep either.
Right.
And I'm not the gatekeeper for that, but I think it's important that we acknowledge the source. That being said, you can access these things.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't need to have a big
It's
corporation.
important to have a combination of whatever works for you, but acknowledge where it came from and acknowledge the fact that you're standing on someone else's shoulders, even if you're adapting it and making your own.
I use the binaural beats. Somebody suggested that to me a few years ago. When I'm having trouble with focus, or when I'm having there's an app you can download on a phone that'll play these tonal vibrations. While I don't necessarily connect to whatever spiritual stuff that would be, I can see based on how I react to these binaural stuff how a sound bath would be very functional. Mm-hmm. Just scientifically, because I know the science behind binaural. So I can understand how that would actually translate to a sound bath. It's just another form of vibration anyway.
Okay, so what is Caren Ann Appel, MSW, MA, wonderful person spending a ton of your time. What is your last tip, trick, technique, whatever you want to call it, for artists?
Schedules, structure. You need structure.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to eat whole. I know this is going to sound more nutritionist versus 70% of your serotonin is created in your gut. So the more you can get away from the processed foods and be whole, and it doesn't mean you have to be a vegan. I'm not saying that, but eat things that are from the perimeter of the store. Yeah. Get your sleep. I know that that's the very boring sort of send off.
No, that taking care of yourself as an artist and as a human being is so important. Like getting regular sleep, eating healthy, doing the basic fucking work that just seems boring.
It's boring, but you got to do it.
And it's how you let yourself be more creative. It's how you let yourself function. So our three things are: we have automatic writing.
Yep.
And our deep breaths, or our therapeutic breaths, yoga breaths, whatever you want to call them. We have music and
clay work and things that work
and more like
somatic.
Somatic is what I was looking for. And
art and somatic together.
Yeah, art and somatic, and like if you're a if you learn through like kinesiology, like the movement of your body. And the third one is the basic: take care of yourself. Try to sleep on a semi-regular schedule. Even if you have crazy nights you want to stay up writing, try to eat healthy and take care of yourself, and reach out to other people. That's what I'm going to say.
That's another great one.
Force yourself, set an alarm once a week, reach out to someone. I'm terrible at it. I think about my friends and family all the time, and I so rarely call them.
Do you have that object permanence problem that if you don't see them, you forget for a while?
Or I forget to connect with them. They exist as like something inside my head instead of something physical. It has been so lovely having you on. I unfortunately need to get going, but we are going to have more conversations. I'd like to set up maybe like a monthly conversation about some new subject. We've kind of just been scattershot today.
I could be your in-house mental health person. There you go. That sounds good to me.
Is there a way people can contact you? I know you're on social media. You're at Mama Bear Therapy on Instagram. Yes. Is that your TikTok as well?
It's my TikTok as well. So you can definitely get me through there. So you can certainly contact me if you want like a quick answer to something. Because of my process in where I am with my work, I can't take people just willy-nilly in terms of as clients, or I can't really refer outside of my own area. However, I love for people to reach out if they have just a comment or a question or just want to get to know, this is how we make friends. So absolutely, definitely get to know me through that.
I was going to just ask, what is your nom de plume for your...
Yeah, Harper Kincaid. You can go to harperkincaid.com. To Kill a Mockinggirl. It's a cozy mystery based in my town. All of my books are revenge fantasies. So there you go. And so that one's been out, and the Midsummer Night's Scheme will be coming out later this year. So that's actually all based in theater.
Awesome titles. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Passion for me getting this word out into this kind of community, and I really am very grateful, Caren, that you were able to join us today.
I'm grateful for you too, for sure. Anyway, contact me anytime, guys.
Last thing, please like and subscribe. I do want to be able to keep bringing you this. Right now, this kind of just exists because Matt and I do it. We would love to have a sponsor. If you want to sponsor us and you're someone I don't find reprehensible or maybe even like a brand, I would love that. And I would love to take someone on as a sponsor, and you get to be a part of really amazing conversations about art, entertainment, mental health, industry, and how to work on yourself. You can of course follow us at Sherwood Players across social media, sherwoodplayers.com. And if you can listen to this as a podcast as well, thanks to Steve Brock.
Different podcast, your whatever podcast catcher you use, Apple Podcasts, all the way to Google Podcasts.
Just search Sherwood Shakeup, hosted through Anchor FM. Thank you so much, which I believe is a Spotify service, right, Steve?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to post in the show notes down below, either in the podcast or on YouTube, some mental health resources and some emergency hotlines as well if you're feeling like you're just really overwhelmed. Thanks so much for being here with us and for sitting through an extra long special session. Thank you so much to Steve and Caren. Peace, love, and have a wonderful day, guys.
Thank you.
Caren.